Hi, and welcome to the Talent LNK podcast in partnership with LincolnHR, where we talk all things workforce and talent. I'm Kaylie Hogan-Schnittker, Director of Talent Strategy with the Lincoln Partnership for Economic Development. Today, I'm joined in the AOI Podcast Room with Chad Mayers, Founder and Executive Director of the Work Lab. Chad, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk about this really creative program that you have put together to support our workforce and also employers. So are you ready to dive in a little bit?
Let's do it.
All right. So share a little bit about the story behind the Work Lab. How did it come to be? What have you modeled it after?
Yep. So this started a little over 5 years ago. Back at the time, I was an HR director with Coca-Cola, primarily based out of Omaha, but I have responsibility for most of the state of Nebraska. Through that role, I had gotten involved in some different workforce development and collective impact nonprofit stuff in town up in Omaha. So I started to learn more about kind of the other side of life that manifests itself at work. And the way I like to summarize that is what an employer can see as a performance issue, maybe an absenteeism problem, or a good old-fashioned attitude, is usually the result of something else that's going on in someone's life, and that's just really the symptoms that you see from it. But it doesn't really impact why that's happening.
Kind of an iceberg effect almost.
Yeah, in a way. And employers, as you might imagine, are somewhat flat-footed on how to help with that. I mean, you have the traditional kind of EAP, or they may have some connections in the community. But really inside the workplace, there's no real good way to talk about those things, especially given the nature of a relationship that your employees have with you and vice versa. And by that, I mean it's a professional relationship. So personal stuff, especially deeply personal stuff that can affect your ability to be either physically, mentally, emotionally present at work, is not something you want to talk about with your supervisor, your HR, or even your best friend at work. It's just stuff you don't bring into that place. And so because of that, employers can't do much to help in those situations, sometimes until it's too late. So you could be having a performance conversation with someone, maybe they're getting fired, and then they come out with, well, this has been going on with my kid, or, this, that, or the other. And so a recognition of there's a problem here, and when businesses have a problem, typically they like to try to solve the problem. So we kind of came at it from that frame. And it was learning about a program that was actually started up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, first with a company and then turned into a nonprofit. That nonprofit is called The Source. Okay. And they had pioneered this approach of having a navigator, a resource navigator as they called them, available to employees to sit in this gap space. So the space between your personal life and your working life and how those overlap, that person sits in that space so that when you have someone or something going on outside of work affecting your ability to be present at work, you go and talk to the navigator who's not a part of the organization, but is available to you by nature of your relationship with the organization. So in essence, it becomes a part of the workplace benefits that are being offered to the employer. And because of that, the employers are paying into this nonprofit to have the privilege of being able to do this. And the navigator is available not only to employees of the company, but by extension, their family members.
Oh, wow.
So you go up to parents, you go down to their kids, and then kind of across that generation. So brothers, sisters, brother-in-law, sisters-in-law, really anything that's going on. It's an entry point to go and talk to someone. And what I liked about that approach is, and this is especially true in Omaha, but I think it's probably somewhat true in Lincoln too, we're not lacking resources or services or nonprofit services out there. In Omaha, I like to joke, whatever issue you can think of, there's a nonprofit for it. It's that connection piece. It's the relationship piece that's in between that, because that service may be out there, that nonprofit may be out there and exist, but if you don't know that or know who to talk to get access to those resources, then it's a completely different issue. So that's where the idea came from, in essence. And then we, through a series of conversations, we ended up actually sitting underneath the umbrella of the Omaha Chamber And we started this back in 2019 with the support of the business community. So we were funded by the business community, and we positioned ourselves that way on purpose. And then when we started doing this, and again, we borrowed that navigator term, we positioned ourselves as a workplace benefit, and this was all done intentionally. We wanted to have the businesses be able to support us financially and develop the partnership in that way. Thought process being that if they're fully supporting us financially, we can then be fully supporting their employees, and that's kind of where we come in. We want to support the employees. That in turn would support the company. So we asked the employers roughly just to pay us what it costs us to do this from an all-in cost standpoint. So the investment from an employer side is pretty significant, but they can split it up amongst their peers and collaborate in that way to kind of buy a share of a person, as it were. And so as we started doing that work with that investment from the employers underneath the Omaha Chamber, we were really able to start to grow the program. And this, again, started in 2019, and it's existed ever since. And then at the end of this past year, just to kind of get us all the way there as quickly as I can, and this was kind of a plan that was in place from the get-go, we went out from underneath the Omaha Chamber's umbrella, rebranded ourselves as the Work Lab, and then rebranded that Navigator title as a work-life coach, which we felt like was a more all-encompassing kind of title to talk about all the different things that they do. And we've been operating as an independent nonprofit, 501c3, all of this year.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, we have 8 different employers that we're working with right now, and we're looking to grow that number.
Yeah.
So
how you mentioned EAPs, kind of what differentiates the Work Lab and these work-life coaches from kind of your traditional EAP? Can you explain that just a little bit deeper?
Yeah, and I take it a little bit more broadly to start. So our aim is to complement anything that's already out there. And again, it's by nature of we're trying to put a relationship and connection in place to attach to resources that are out there. So I mentioned nonprofits already. That's one of the directions that we go. But also, if you look at the benefits that the employer's already providing to their employees, that's part of the compensation package that they've already given to their team members. We want to make sure that they're fully utilizing the resources that are available to them. So I know from my experience working in HR that most employees don't know all about the benefits that they're offering. It can be super complicated. And an EAP is one of those. All of our employer partners have an EAP program. We encourage them to keep them. Our job is to help them get the utilization out of that investment that they're making in the EAP. So from that standpoint, those services, and it's usually therapy services that sit on the back end. If we're working with the client, say they come to us about some stress that they have in their life, and they want to speak to a therapist as a result of the conversation. So part of what we're doing is educating them on what therapy is, what it isn't. Sometimes there's some cultural barriers that we need to overcome as part of that conversation.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It can take time for people to be comfortable to the point where they're ready to ask for help. That takes a lot of courage. And then when they're ready to pick up the phone, we'll sit there with them and talk to them as they're talking to the EAP counselor on the other side. We'll remind them that it's perfectly acceptable for them to advocate for themselves and choosing a therapist that works well for them or for their family. They can change their therapist if they want to. So it's really about getting the most out of that investment, and we view that as a complementary relationship. We're not trying to replace anything that's already out there.
Yes, I can hear that just in the way you describe that. And I think, EAPs are really great, but even myself, we have one here, and sometimes I forget we even have one.
Yep.
And I know, everyone's hands are tied and people's time is so busy that constantly your HR person having to remind every single person within your workforce can be a lot. So that it really seems like you're uplifting not only your employer, but the employee and those pieces that make working wherever they work a great place.
Yep. It's all about, again, there's resources that are out there available. There's benefits that are being provided to you. I'd say the same about government benefits in a different direction. By nature of being a citizen, if you meet certain criteria, you're entitled to benefits. Same with your employment relationship. By nature of being an employee there, you're entitled to a certain set of benefits that are provided to you. But you also have to take advantage of those resources, those benefits that are available to you. And sometimes that involves picking up the phone and making that call. And that can be hard.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Yeah. One, I mean, if you're already maybe struggling with something else going on, I know that when I've had a lot of stress, it's hard sometimes to make that call.
Yep.
And so to have someone who can support you through that, it sounds pivotal to a great work experience.
Yep. Asking for help is hard to do. Having someone there who can support you and asking for help can really go a long way.
Absolutely. How do you measure the impact of your work with both your businesses and the employees that you're supporting?
Yeah, so the primary piece that we look at is just utilization. Are people utilizing the services that are offered to them? From our standpoint, our services are free, so the employer's paying for us. So to the employee, it's free, and there is no number of sessions thing. You can come and talk to us as often as you want to. It's voluntary, so you don't have to talk to us if you don't want to. We don't do any sort of mandatory referrals for performance things, and it's also confidential. But because of that voluntary piece, we have to go out there and kind of cultivate those relationships with employees. So the main thing that we're looking at is the utilization of employees of the services. The thinking there is that if they're utilizing it, that they're getting value from it. We won't allow an employee to just sit in the room and not talk to a coach about something. We got to be actively working on something. So it starts there. And then it's addressing the different things that they have going on. And we track what that looks like, and we present this to the employers in monthly meetings. And we've also started this year tracking employees' goals. So
Cool.
What are the longer term goals that you're trying to achieve? We call those end goals. But then we're trying to track our progress towards those, so you can break down things into smaller chunks. So we're tracking those, and they kind of fit into different categories. The way that the employers think about that kind of ROI, and ROI is something that's really hard to measure. You're going to have to make some assumptions along the way. From our standpoint, we're going to get to about 15 to 25% utilization across the employer base on any given year. With our employers this year, we're actually tracking a little bit higher than that with a few of them. But from that standpoint, every single employer kind of has their own internal cost of turnover. So let's say that's $10,000 per employee, and I'm throwing out numbers that have been given to me. If we're meeting with, say you got 1,000 employees, and I'm meeting with 150 of them, and it's $10,000 every time someone leaves, if I help 15 people stay that otherwise would have left, knowing that that's a counterfactual that I can't prove, that's where you're getting that return on your investment there. Yeah. That's how we kind of frame that up.
That makes a lot of sense. I think this, as you talk about it, and as I've heard you talk about it before, the retention piece around this is so huge. And I hear the struggles and challenges that certain employers have, especially with that quicker turnover within the first 6 months or a year.
Yep.
And it really sounds like this could help with that. That issue.
And a lot of issues that would keep someone, that would be a traditional kind of barrier to staying at work, those will manifest themselves pretty quickly when you're on a job. So having someone there, and our services are available from the get-go, can help mitigate some of those issues. Oftentimes too, though, it can be something really small that maybe it's just a conversation that someone needs to have. And so what I describe this as, sometimes you'd like to scream at the wall, but you'd like the wall to at least acknowledge your presence. So you could have a company say they're going through a bunch of change, and there's certainly been a lot of that over the past 5 years. And employees aren't always up to speed with all the things. Even if you're trying to deliver that message, things can get lost in translation. So a lot of times we're just allowing a space for an employee to come in and just get whatever it is that they're thinking about outside of their brain, or away from the water cooler with fellow employees, where that game of telephone can really get going. And we can just talk about stuff. And by talk about, I mean, we let them talk. We sit there, we acknowledge, we reflect, and we ask them if they would like to do anything about the conversation that we just have. And we'll guide them on a path. If they want to go talk to their supervisor about it, we get the emotion out of the conversation. But in most cases, just having the conversation, they're fine. And now they're ready to go back to work. They just needed to get it out. So it can really be cathartic in that way. And that can provide a real value for employers of giving your employees that space to kind of get it out and then, okay, get back to work.
Yeah. So well, when you feel there's psychological safety within your workplace, you work better. So that's really cool to hear.
Yep.
What do you, so this is kind of twofold. I think when I made some assumptions when I first heard about Work Lab, and I think my assumptions automatically went to, well, it's just for like entry level folks or those like really high turnover positions, but that's not true, correct?
No, not at all. We're available to everyone within the organization, and that's part of the change from navigator to work life coach. So from the navigator standpoint, it was all about barriers, and let's help remove the barriers that are keeping you from being able to do your work. So not everyone, in a sense, needs a navigator because not everyone has those barriers. With the work-life coach title, and we've always been doing this, it's just the way that we talk about it, really.
Yeah, language matters.
It's not only those barriers, because life happens along the way, but it's what do you want to do? So from a very fundamental piece for us, why do you work? What's the, like, break it all the way down. So you have, I want to have a career that I enjoy, purpose in my work. I want to get good pay and competitive benefits, all those sorts of things. But in my estimation, you're working because there's some sort of life down the road that you want to have for yourself, for your family. It could be the life that you retire into. It could be the life that you want to have a year from now. However you slice it, you're working because there's a life you want to achieve. So that's part of the frame that we bring into our conversations with employees is you may be here today because you need rental assistance. Okay, we can help you with that, and there might be community resources to help with that, or maybe it's a savings plan or what have you. But what do you want? What do you want to do? And as you start to have those conversations with someone, you realize how often, whether we think about it, but we don't write it down and we don't make a plan that's broken down into smaller steps of whatever it is that we want to do. I want to travel in Europe for a month, 10 years from now. I want to own my own home. I want to send my kids to college, whatever it may be for anyone. And these are all individual goals that we have. That's why you're working, fundamentally. So we bring that into the conversations that we have with every single employee that we talk to. And for the organizations, we're making that a part of kind of the contract that they have together. So the employers want their employees to be engaged with the mission of the organization, what the organization is trying to achieve. So in essence, they want the employee to kind of give of themselves to the organization, and the traditional deals will give you good pay and benefits to be able to do that.
Yep.
We're kind of turning that on its head in a way by using the organization as a placeholder where we're putting our coaches, and our coaches sit on site a certain number of days a week to remove any additional barriers to access. And then we're coming down to the employee and we're saying, what do you want and how can we help you get there? Whether you're with this company for the next 6 months, for 3 years, for 6 years, for 10 years, or you want to spend your entire career here, we can help you along the way. It's your life. It's your goals. It's the things you want to have. We're completely agnostic, but we can help you put a plan in place to achieve your goals. And that's why we're there. That's why we're doing what we do. We want to hit that fundamental piece, be able to address the stuff that comes up along the way, but really allow the employee, the employer, to make good on that promise of, hey, I want you to be able to build the life that you want, and we're going to support you in doing that.
Yeah, that's really neat. And it sounds like an invaluable piece to have in your benefits package.
Yeah, well, we certainly feel so. I'm biased, but we feel so.
Yes. So what role does diversity and inclusion play within these practices? Because I do know that it fits here. There's equity being provided.
Yep. So I think for the past few years, what we've seen is there's been large conversations about those issues, and I'm using DEI and the capital D, capital E, capital I. But for businesses, a lot of that comes down to, okay, I hear you. I've heard the drumbeat. I understand. I get it. We have to do some things differently, some practices differently. What? What do I need to do? And so we really see ourselves as an actionable step that an employer can take into that space where when you're trying to address these things, especially from an equity standpoint, it's very hard and in most cases illegal for an employer to treat people differently.
Yeah.
And we all understand why.
Yes.
But we can treat people differently in the work that we're doing. We're trying to get down to the individual. What is best for them? What do they want? And the thinking is if we can help them achieve what it is that they want, that will provide that ultimate value. So it could be that there are some systemic issues that have been at play that have led someone to be sitting in our office needing rental assistance, or maybe it's a returning citizen, or maybe it's an immigrant or a refugee. These individuals work for organizations in our community. It could be a benefits cliff issue that's, kept someone from being able to work. All of these things are things that you can work through. We're there to help you work through those things. So you can address a lot of the hallmarks of equity issues along the way, keep someone employed, keep them moving forward in their career, and then they're able to take advantage of some of the opportunities that they may have. From an equity standpoint, you may have a young mother who loses her Title 20 benefits. Perfectly reasonable for her to want to quit her job to get those benefits back, and then I'll find another place of employment where I can keep those benefits because I may get a 50-cent an hour raise, but I've now lost $5 worth of benefits. So we can help that mother get through that situation, come up with a plan to address it by talking to the child care provider, by finding some resources that may be out there, but keeping them working, keeping them moving forward so that when a promotional opportunity comes up where they can get that $5 or $6 an hour difference, they're able to take advantage of that because they've been working along the way. They don't have to leave the workforce. And we know some of the deteriorating effects that can have from an equity standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and in a way, you are supporting the community at large by helping individuals who, may choose not to work because of some reason or whatnot. So that's really cool. I appreciate that. And I think, as you see people as humans, I think that again provides kind of that safety feeling in the workplace, which is, again, so important to doing well.
Yeah. To me, that's where inclusivity will ultimately get you to if you take it to the place where it goes from like a reductio ad absurdum way. You got to treat people as individuals. Let's get to that point as much as we can. I'm gonna treat you like Kaylie. You treat me like Chad.
Yep.
And I think that's really where those conversations are trying to get to.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to be a piece of that where employers can lean into that space while maintaining the things that they need to maintain. But when we see some things that are at play inside of the workplace, we can address those as well. So
cool. Well, nitty-gritty things, or I guess if an employer here in Lincoln is interested in providing this, what does that look like for them? Do they have to have someone on site every week, multiple days a week? What kind of pitch it to my Lincoln folks on why they should incorporate the work lab?
Yeah. Well, I think we've proven that the work that we do will work in any size employer, in any industry. Our employers kind of run the gamut. We have two kind of main structures to the model. I said it's on site, and that again is done on purpose. However, we do have a couple of our employer partners that have pretty large remote workforces, and we've been able to support those employees not only in the Omaha area, but really across the country. A few of them are hiring folks nationally, and it's the same process no matter where you live. From an on-site standpoint, you can invest in a certain number of days per week. So you want a work-life coach on site 1 day per week? Great. If you want one on site 4 days per week, awesome. In those cases, we actually will give an employer 2 different coaches.
Okay.
And we try to complementary skill sets. So like as an example, one may be bilingual.
Okay.
One may not be bilingual, and they may have different kinds of backgrounds. For smaller to medium-sized businesses, and for us that means 150 employees or less, it's a similar model, but instead of committing to a full day on site, it's a half day, a certain number of weeks per month.
Okay.
Doesn't really lend itself to saying it verbally, but it's a different structure. You still have the same virtual access as an employer that has 4 days on site per week. By virtual, I mean calls, texts, email, virtual meetings, which I think a lot of employees are way more comfortable with now. But we're very, very accessible to employees. So that on-site piece is kind of that premium piece. It also allows us to get up and walk around and talk to people out on the production floor, which is hugely important in building that rapport and those relationships.
Absolutely.
So we really become a part of the culture with our employer in that way. But that structure that we have allows us to really have big degree of difference in price points. Some of those are up in 6 figures annually, and then some of those are 4 figures. So it's a wide range, but we can customize it based on the employer's needs, based on the investment that they're willing to make, and start it that way. Absolutely.
That's awesome. And it's nice that you can, not white glove it almost to kind of customize it for the needs of your own organization.
Yep.
But before we wrap up, are there any stories or examples that have really stuck out to you while you've been in this process that you'd like to share?
Yeah, a few. It can really be anything. The ones that stand out the most are the ones where we've helped someone through a lot of stuff that can be really difficult. As an example, recently we've had a few different employees that have been going through divorces.
That's hard.
And they can be from all different aspects of the organization from a hierarchy standpoint. One particular case, there was an individual who had gone back into the workforce because they were getting divorced. They were in a city that they hadn't lived in, so they'd moved here because of their spouse. The divorce was not going very well. There was a lot of combativeness going back and forth. From a resources standpoint, you would immediately go to, well, they need an attorney.
Yeah.
That was tip of the iceberg in this particular situation. This divorce played out over the course of a year.
Wow.
Kids in the middle of it, so it got ugly fast. But really it was how that person's life was changing that is what we were working on.
Yeah.
So obviously your relationship with your spouse is ended. So that is going on.
Yeah.
You're now losing half of the family that you've had for however long you've been married. If you have friends, some cases they're going to choose sides.
Wow.
Because of the relationships that you have. If you have kids, obviously those relationships are changing. Your finances are changing, of course, because you're losing that household. Maybe you have to move into a new place. All that's going on. But really it's how are you doing week in, week out throughout that process. So all of these things that I've already mentioned are all part of the plan that you can kind of put in place. And that can be a little bit more tactical, a little bit more objective. But in any of those conversations that we're having with an employee, we're always making space for, how are you doing this week? How are you feeling? And because we're sitting in it with them and we have no agenda, we can really sit on that question, how are you? Followed by a long silence that will allow the employee to really think about how they're doing. And oftentimes what we see is when you get into planning mode, something has happened, and now I have to make a plan and I have to execute. No one's asking you how you're doing.
No.
And that can be a great space to give to someone to really think through how they're feeling along the way, because these things take a long time.
Yeah.
And if you don't process those things, if you don't get it out of your head, it can take you to some dark places.
Yeah.
So,
and that affects all aspects of life, and having to show up to work while you're going through that is a lot. So the work lab sounds like it was an incredible resource for that individual. And what a great story.
Yeah. And that's just a particularly acute thing. I mean, you can think of all sorts of things where there's
absolutely.
something going on in your life where you're in your head about it, whatever it may be. Just having the opportunity to go and talk to someone about it, get out how you're thinking, how you're feeling without any agenda whatsoever, and allow you to kind of process through those emotions that you've been having and then start to move forward.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes is sometimes the only way forward is through.
Yes. I
And
say
I think
that a lot.
I think that's important in so many different aspects of life. But we have no choice but to move forward. But we have to find those things that we can control within moving forward. And that's part of what we're there for.
Awesome.
So,
Well, thank you so much again for
thank you.
coming. I adore the work that you all do at the Work
Appreciate
Lab,
that.
and I think it's imperative to our workforce, especially just as we navigate diverse workforces, trying to be inclusive, providing for the needs of the people who are
Yep.
in
Yep.
these organizations. So
Absolutely.
thank you again for being here
Thank you.
today.
Appreciate it.
I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Thank you.